Russia's faltering invasion of Ukraine has ground into its fourth month now. It's now the 92nd day or 93rd day, in fact, by the time you watch this. The script has so far defied the expectations of the entire world, not just Vladimir Putin's. You might remember that when the invasion started on 24th February, even I had said, mea culpa, in that week's national interest, that by the time you are reading this article, chances are that Kyiv would have fallen. It's been 92 days since. So Ukrainians have now proven us all wrong, and most importantly, they've proven Vladimir Putin wrong, because he had also expected a quick folding up of Ukrainians. Now, nobody had imagined mostly stalemated, grinding, conventional ground war 90 plus days on. But that is the reality right now. Much confusion and doubt still remain. It has moral, geopolitical and strategic dimensions, all three. So let's begin with the moral aspect first, because that is addressed easily if rudely. So please give me anticipatory bail as I roll out my argument, and stay with me. Be patient with me. Here is what many wise people across the world are telling Ukraine right now. Henry Kissinger, a wise 99, says Ukraine should make a bitter compromise. There is no point fighting the Russians and getting your country destroyed. Similarly, the venerable New York Times editorial board, which is otherwise carrying out stellar coverage of the war, says that Russia is too strong to be defeated. Even Washington should stop taunting Vladimir Putin, and Ukraine should make the best of a bad bargain. There is no point fighting on, because there is no chance of Ukraine being able to defeat the Russians in spite of Western help. The expression they use is Russia is too strong. Besides, there are some eminent scholars, from John Mearsheimer of Chicago University, Noam Chomsky, to Kishore Mehbubani from Singapore. In fact, you can watch his conversation with me on Print Off the Cuff. I'm sharing a link with you. We had published it just a week back. Then these are, however, heavyweight intellectuals of the global debating circuit. If we get a sense of the larger popular opinion in India, in our own country, and not just on social media, there is also a lot of latent affection for Russia, or awe for Soviet Union or Russia, that they are big military superpowers. How can a tiny country which did not have any credible armed forces 10 years back defeat them? So there is that sense also. Now, the feeling in India seems to be, predominantly in the public opinion, that the West enticed, taunted and trapped Putin into this invasion. And now they want to defeat him in Ukraine and undermine Russian power. Russia is a friend of India. That also, the popular opinion in India is that NATO's eastward expansion was a grave provocation for Putin. The West will fight Russia to the last Ukrainian, but at the same time, Putin will also defend Russia's interest to the last Ukrainian or the last Russian, whatever the situation be, whatever the case might be. That Zelensky is an upstart, that's also part of Indian popular view right now, that Zelensky is an upstart and he's getting his comeuppance. If he still got some sense, he'd accept Russia's terms. Many in the Donbass region are Russian speaking. They see themselves as more Russian anyway, or he can watch his own country destroyed, right? So this is a choice for Zelensky to make. If he's sensible, he should make peace with Russia and submit to Putin's terms. Now, let's turn the gaze inwards and do some war gaming. For abundant caution, let me underline again that this part is pure fiction, fantasy, or maybe a bad dream. So even if you get angry with me, not too much please. Imagine that this summer, or maybe any summer, China decides to quote unquote settle its boundary dispute with India entirely on its own terms and attacks on both fronts, that is the western front in Ladakh and the eastern front in Arunachal Pradesh at the same time. Now, as that is going on for about 2 weeks, Indian armed forces are fighting back valiantly. There's a lot of attrition, and this war goes on. Say in 2 weeks, Pakistan also throws its weight in the war. So Pakistan also attacks across the Kashmir front. So this then becomes a three-front war. Chinese on two fronts, Pakistan on one front, China and Pakistan acting in cahoots. The weight of the momentum of that war or that assault becomes really heavy. And chances are that defender, when facing such a momentum of attack, when you are essentially defending, you do fall back a little bit. So there is some territory loss, even if temporary. Now, between China and Pakistan, India will face a power about 6 times its economy and 7 times its defense budget. That is, if we trust China's budget figures. Everybody suspects the Chinese defense budgets are much higher than they reveal to the world. The defense for India is tough, fighting brutal, and some territory is lost in the adverse momentum, as usually happens when you are fighting in defense. Of course, our Quad allies and some other countries like France and Israel help, but we fight our own battles. At which point Xi Jinping sends India and its allies, especially the US, a little note with his conditions to end the war. And he says, listen, I also speak for Pakistan, so it's implicit that this has Pakistan's endorsement. What does that little note say? That little note has its conditions for peace, for ceasefire, and for settling the boundary dispute with India. He says very simply that India cedes Aksai formally to China. China occupies most of it since early 1950s. But he says, you now cede it to me formally, take it out of your maps. Also accept my 1959 claim line for Ladakh. Then India should give up Arunachal Pradesh, or maybe Chinese would be generous and seek only Tawang district, because they will say that this has sentimental value in Tibet. Then they will add, also throw into us the tiny slivers of territory that we've been claiming in the central sector. That is mostly the Uttarakhand sector and little bit say in the Himachal Pradesh sector. So give it all, छोटा मोटा territory है, उसके बाद peace हो जाएगा. To Pakistan, the same conditions say India should hand over the Kashmir Valley. In a true spirit of cooperation and peacemaking, the Pakistanis might let India keep Jammu and give it access to Ladakh. I'm being sarcastic, and that's the reason I'm requalifying it again and again, because I am concerned somebody will take out 30 seconds, maybe 10 seconds of this and run it on social media saying, oh, Shekhar Gupta says, give Kashmir Valley away to Pakistan. I am saying this is a theoretical, fictional scenario. Now, the Chinese might say, while you are at it, might as well also settle Nepal's claims on Lipu Lake and Limpi Udhara and ask Bhutan to hand over what China demands. India obviously says, go to hell. At which point, the war involving 3 nuclear-armed adversaries alarms the world. The smartest people across the world, the Henry Kissingers and the rest, advise India on the futility of fighting against impossible odds. As missiles rain on cities and thousands die. Are these Himalayan wastelands worth risking your entire existence for? Country of 1.4 billion people, Indians, are you thinking sensibly, or are you just going by ego, or are you just being obstinate? Be reasonable, do it the way the Chinese and the Pakistanis want it. The Chinese are only demanding what they believe are theirs, basically. Some of these experts might say China is too strong to be defeated. They might say, just as they're saying about Russia to Ukraine. How will that feel? How will that feel in India? And Pakistan, again, the same international opinion might say, the Pakistanis have always had a claim on Kashmir. In any case, a lot of Kashmiris in the valley are not happy with India. Let them go. That's how you can save your country from destruction, the world from a possible Armageddon, and usher in permanent peace. Now, have I got you triggered by raising these possibilities? If I have, and that was the idea, I feel vindicated. I hear you when you say things on the battlefield shall never come to such a pass. There can never be such military adventurism by China and Pakistan together. Remember, that's what we all thought until the morning of 24th February about Russia and Ukraine, until real missiles started raining over Kyiv and Russian commandos and special forces landed at Hostomel Air Base just miles away from Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. Next, you would say, but we've got our Quad allies and the nukes, so why should we bother? Now, let me remind you that Ukraine has much stronger allies among our Western friends. What they will sell us for money, they are giving to Ukraine for free right now. Lately, it's been a $40 billion package. To India, everything will be sold in any circumstances. And Putin has the nukes. But the thing about these weapons is, as he must be realizing, as Putin must be realizing now, that nobody can use them first. If India called Pakistan's nuclear bluff in Balakot, the world has called Putin's nuclear bluff several times over during this war and in the crisis leading up to the war. This is what we call as Gidad Bhabki, right? This is just an empty threat. Because if any war or if any crisis, if you reach a threshold, if a country reaches a threshold where the first use of nuclear weapons becomes necessary, you've already lost too much. You don't want to imagine that situation. You don't wish anyone you value, least of all your own nation, to get into that situation where nukes are the only option left. Now, I have said repeatedly already that all this is pure fictional wargaming, but it helps us understand how the Ukrainian feels today when asked to concede Putin's demands and live happily ever after with a diminished territory and also a compromised sovereignty. How can you give such an advice to a sovereign country? Russia, in fact, has sent a note listing these conditions. That is the reason I used that comparison or that example or that analogy of Xi Jinping's China sending India a note, because Putin's Russia has sent a similar note. That's why I've used that parallel in my China war game. People of any nation have a right to their nationalism, and as long as they are willing to fight for it, it's obscene to lecture them to become supplicants, however formidable their adversary. In case our fictional scenario becomes a reality, God forbid, where would we Indians be? What will happen if the world lectures us like that? That's the reason I said this might trigger you. Now, when that happens, we will be together as one in India. We will be together to fight back and defend our territory and sovereignty, whatever the price. That's what the Ukrainians are doing right now. And what will we tell those who advise us to see the reality, to accept a bitter compromise? Even this suggestion will get us furious. And maybe then we will all collectively scream at these so-called well-wishers in a tone more outraged than Greta Thunberg's "How dare you," isn't it? Moral aspects sorted, the geopolitical and strategic ones are simpler to look at. This war will leave Russia much weaker economically, militarily, and strategically. That is, even if it wins the war and occupies all of Ukraine. Even then, Russia will emerge much weaker, much enfeebled. China will watch in consternation as its strongest, most valuable ally is diminished. At some point, the US, Europe, and China will repair their ties. In fact, lately we've seen a paper leaked from CIA, and you know how these things leak in Washington and why these things leak in Washington, which uses game theory to suggest that at some point, not in very distant future, Biden might make a dramatic new opening to China, because global powers work in their own self-interest. Every country works in their own self-interest. So China will watch in consternation as its strongest ally is diminished. At some point, the US, Europe, and China will repair their ties. There is too much economics riding there. India will hasten its pivot to the West and dilute its military dependence on Russia or any one source. Overall, this will alter the global balance of power. The global balance of power that emerges when this war ends, as it will one day, will be very different from what we see right now. We can only anticipate and war game it. We don't know for sure what it will be. My understanding, however, is that strategically for India, this is a once-in-a-generation sweet spot. The global order is up in the air, and India is fortunate to be fully out of this fight. Right? The last thing we wanted to be in this fight in any which way. We are completely out of this fight, which is the best thing to happen to India. India is non-partisan, is wooed by all, and will see great new possibilities open up as the crisis drags and finally concludes. A weaker Russia, a sobered China, at a time when Xi Jinping is maneuvering to protect his third-term prospects. A reunited West, a chaotic Pakistan. This is a perfect set of strategic circumstances for India. It opens up possibilities unimaginable until recently on economic, strategic, and military issues. It is for India now to consummate this historic opportunity or blow it as we've done with some others in the past.